What's up, Simonics? Welcome back to a new quick win, and today we are going to implement Apple sign-in in combination with Firebase. So recently I had an article or a guest post on the official Ionic blog about the general procedure, but today we will also add Firebase to the mix to build a cool sign-in. So in order to do this, we need to basically configure a lot of things up front and won't do a lot of coding. You can get started first of all by creating a new identifier for your application inside your iOS developer account. You can simply go ahead, click plus, click new app ID, give it a description, and the important part is to select sign in with Apple from this list. So this needs to be enabled, and I already get this enabled. I will use this bundle ID, and yes, sign in with Apple is activated. After going through this, you can also get started with your application if you want to. Simply bring up a new Ionic application of the type Angular and also add Capacitor, since we will do this with Capacitor. Also, we need to install a community plugin for Capacitor, and you see the implementation of the plugin is actually easy. The tricky part is handling the response that we get back from the plugin and use it in combination with Firebase. So simply install this plugin and then you're ready to go with Capacitor. Since we also want to use Firebase in our project, we will first of all generate a new service that will handle the interaction with Firebase, and then you can add the Angular Fire package now using the schematic. Perhaps the final version is already released of version 6. Right now I have to use add next at the end of this command to get the latest version. I don't know why, but this didn't install Firebase immediately for me. So you can check your package.json dependencies, and if Firebase is not in there after running the ng-add for Angular Fire, you also need to manually install this, just as a little information. And also, right now, I don't know why as well, new Ionic applications are created with Angular 8, and you need Angular 9 for the latest version of Angular Fire. So just go ahead and update the Angular CLI and Angular Core in your project, and if you get a warning that your project is dirty because you haven't committed the files, you can simply add allow dirty to this command to make it actually more easy and just update Angular to Angular 9 in your project. Okay, that's it for the Apple part. You also need to get your bundle ID here, because that's important, and add it in your Capacitor configuration, because this is the value your native project will have once you run the Capacitor build commands, and therefore you should set this in the beginning, because otherwise this can really be a nasty bug. I had this in the past and I needed to find a few places, especially on Android, since we're now on iOS, perhaps not too big of an issue, but anyway, add your bundle ID to the Capacitor configuration. And once you're done with all of this, you can finally run, let's make this a bit bigger, Ionic build. And you have to run this Ionic build once in the beginning in order to actually add the Capacitor iOS platform. So I already got the platform added, but you can go ahead with npx cap add iOS after the initial build is done. And now whenever you make any changes, you can simply run Ionic build npx copy in one command, or you could also use the live reload. Let's see if I find the command external. Yeah, that would be actually the command to run live reload on your device. For this, you simply need to plug in your device. You run the command, and at the end, it will actually already open Xcode for you. And then from Xcode, you deploy to your device. And then somehow magically, your device is serving the application that you see, and you got live reload on the device. So it won't immediately launch the device. That is the important thing to note in here. Okay. As I said, really a lot of configuration things that you need to go through in the beginning. Actually, there's one more thing. This is not kind of Apple one more thing. It's actually one more thing we have to do. Within Firebase, we want to create a new user and we want to use the Apple Authentication with Firebase. In order to do so, there are two things we need to do, or three or four maybe. First of all, go to the Authentication tab of your Firebase project and go to Sign In method, and then find Apple and enable it. Actually, here's Apple requires additional configuration, but you don't need any additional configuration right now. It works on a device, you don't need any callback or whatever. We're not using any of this, so this should work perfectly fine. This is step number one to actually allow Apple sign in. Now you need to make sure your database is ready. If you're using a new project, you have to click Get Started with Firestore or something like this. And also for testing, I recommend you use the simple rules with either a timestamp or just return true. So allow read and write access to your project. If you're starting new, I think you can click Start in Test Mode. That is basically what you need. Now, we're close to getting into our project. I'm really sorry, but this is just the process. You have to go to Settings, and first thing you're gonna add is a web app. So you can simply click Add App, Web, Register Name, and then you will get the Firebase configuration that I already got here since I added this. Copy this out, go to your environment and add it in here. Oh, I actually got this already. Nice. That's your configuration that we need to connect our Ionic app to Firebase. Number two is to add a native iOS app. I'm not 100% sure why we need this, but I got issues if I didn't add it up front. So click on iOS, add the bundle ID you generated here. So really tricky to configure everything and use it, but this bundle ID is one of the key elements. Nickname and the ID is pretty optional. And as far as I know, you also don't need to download the configuration file. I really just added it in here and made sure that I got the bundle ID in here. Perhaps this is some sort of internal stuff going on in Firebase. All right, once you got all of this in place, I think we can actually move to our application. Inside the app module, we need to add a few imports, especially for Angular Fire packages. We need the main Angular Fire module, we need authentication, and we need storage connection. And all of this will be connected using our environment since we've just copied the values to the environment. Now everything goes into your imports array Angular Fire module initialized with the Firebase config that we've written to our environment, the Fire auth module and the Firestore module. One more file that we can close. Now we got only the authentication service and the logic for the view. Actually, we will start with the service because as I've shown you in the beginning, the package is really just this one call. And the interesting part is how we handle this response here. And I will show you a quick preview of what this response looks like in here. So this is what the response from the Apple sign-in looks like. You will get back an email, identity token, family name, Apple user ID, given name, and an authorization code. With that in mind, let's keep it in here. We can create our service. And we will add a function, let's call this one create Firebase user based on the Apple response. So just keep in mind, the Apple response looks, I kind of messed this up, looks like this. To use Firebase here, we also need the general Firebase package, and we can import star as Firebase from Firebase. I don't know why there are two S. Interesting. And the first thing we're gonna create is a new provider. So we have to create this using Firebase .auth. I don't know if I could, I actually got typings. Nice. Oh, that's cool. And from here, we want to use an OAuth provider. Actually, this one is bootstrapped just with a string. I don't know if there's any hint about which ones to use. So for example, here you see Google.com. I think I just figured out that if it's for Google, google.com, for Apple, it would be apple.com. This is now our provider. Now we also need to extract the identity token, because that is what is actually used in Firebase to identify our user as a valid login. So go ahead, create a new credential, and we use our provider.credential. And now you see either the options object contain the ID token, access token, blah, blah, blah. And of course, we do have an ID token. It's just called identity token in the response, but we can use the Apple response.identity token. Okay, I shouldn't make a typo here because that would kind of hurt now. Okay, now we got the credentials created, and now we can actually sign in the user. So use user credential. And now we can use our Angular Fire package instead as well. Because I didn't find these things inside Angular Fire. Perhaps they exist, but I'm not sure. So let's call this first one Angular Fire Store, and then private AF auth is usually the Angular Fire Authentication package. So go ahead with Angular Fire auth, and there's already usually a function to sign in with credential. And that's why we created this kind of special credential up front. We could actually also log this out. I'm not sure how it looks like. So credential, and that's too much. And since we want to use await in here, we have to mark the function as async as well. Now, the credentials we get back from the sign-in are interesting, and we can now use these credentials. So let's log them out as well. After sign in, user credential. These are now credentials that we can pass to our Firestore database. Because now we got credentials, now we can create a user node inside the Firestore database, which you usually always do after the email registration or something like this. So let's create another function to update the user data. Where's the bracket? There we go. And we will pass in the user, the first name and the last name. Okay. And now after we got the user credentials, we can update our user data in Firebase. So the previous step is really just logging the user in the authentication tab. But you know, usually with Firebase, you don't have that data in the Firestore. And that's why we want to now also save this data to Firebase. And therefore we can use the user credential.user, and from our initial Apple response, remember, we got all the information we need. So let's use the given name and also Apple response.family name. And then the package will be happy. So in here, we just need to add a little write operation. I will just bring in so the video is not getting too long. First of all, a reference to a node in your Firestore. I will just use users and the user UID. That's usually a good idea or a good place to store any relevant information. Now, what's interesting is how you need to write the data, because usually you would create a data object like this with email, first name and last name, and then in the end you would call user reference set data, let's say merge true, so it merges with any existing data. But this function is always called when the user signs in, so perhaps on the third or fourth time, or even the second time. And the problem is after this initial response from Apple won't return all of this information once you log in for the second time. And if I would now go ahead and use this function all the time, I would actually overwrite all the data in the Firestore document. And that's of course not a good idea. So only if we have a first name and if we have a last name, we add it to our data. I guess we could handle this different with some other operators, but I just wanted to show you that you have to be careful and not overwrite your data since, well, then you would lose the information that you got on the initial sign up. Let's quickly also add a sign out. This AF sign out. All right, to wrap up the implementation, we will add one more detail to this class, and that is a little observable that will change once the user is logged in. It just to show some data on our page. Thanks for this. And also, this is usually a part of your authentication as well, because your guards need this information, or in general, the authentication in your application. So we will set our user to this AF the authentication state, and we will pipe the result because we're not just interested in the user object. So we will actually call switch map with the user. The user we get here is, let's log this out as well. Standard user is the user you get back from Firebase, like from the authentication tab. But the real information is usually stored in your database, so you can simply switch over, and if you get a user, which means the user is authenticated, you can then instead return this dot Angular Firestore document, and then using once again the path to our document, which is at users user UID dot value changes. Now, to make sure you also return something in the case that the user is logged out, because sometimes you would encounter problems, you have to make sure that you return in the switch map an observable. So you can't simply return null, or I think maybe you could, but usually TypeScript complains otherwise. So I will import off, which basically returns observable of the data null. Now that is our service. It is finished. We simply need to call create Firebase user with the response we get from Apple. This will do all the stuff for us. It will update the user node in the database. We can listen to the changes of the user. So let's now go to our homepage, which actually doesn't need a lot. What we need is the plugins from Capacitor core, and we're going to import the device and sign in with Apple. Inside our constructor, we now also might want to add the private alert controller in case something goes wrong, and our authentication service, there we go, that we just created a second ago. We will also listen to the user by simply subscribing to it from our view, and show Apple sign in is set to false because actually, you shouldn't show this field on Android devices, right? So you should figure out based on the device. So device get info, whether you're actually running on an iOS device. So show Apple sign in is equal to device platform is iOS. We could also, I think, do this with the Ionic platform, but since we're using Capacitor today, let's stick with Capacitor. Also, since we're quite far in this video, let me bring in a bit more of code. The Open Apple sign-in is now using our sign-in with Apple, the thing we just imported up here from the plugins. As shown on the GitHub repository, there's really only calling authorize, then, and catch block, and that's exactly what we have in here. If we now got actually a response from Apple, and this response contains an identity token, so make sure it's some error handling in here, we will call our create Firebase user function, which will handle all the rest, log in the user, and we will see the change of the user observable, otherwise present some alerts. Present alert. Using the alert controller, of course, I use a different name. You could also log out the response. Really, this is now the boring part of the tutorial, so I will rush through the end a bit more. Finally, our view is now responsible of calling open Apple sign-in and logout, so we can at least once go through the whole flow. And for this, I made a little ngIf usage in here. I'm actually not sure if we used this in our videos before. Let's take a look at the elements here. We will display this card if the user, which is an observable, so we have to use the async pipe, and then wrap it with brackets because we will show it if we don't have a user. And otherwise, we would show the welcome template. So we see the ng template hashtag welcome is connected to this ngIf else statement. If we don't have a user, the first card will be displayed with a button for our sign in with Apple, and only if we have show Apple sign in. So not showing on Android or the web. On the other card, we got a little welcome back. Once again, the async pipe, since the user is an observable, and we will simply print out the user details using JSON, and then we also got logout in there as well. And since I, in the background, added the live reload, let's try to deploy this to a device. If you get any errors, which is kind of possible, I would say, first of all, make sure your Apple ID is configured correctly in the device, in the developer account of Apple. Second, make sure Firebase is configured correctly. Apple signed in activated. You also need to make sure that you create the web and the iOS ID inside Firebase, which we did. And finally, a thing we haven't done is going to the signing capabilities, not capacitor abilities, and select sign in with Apple. I have already selected it from this list, I guess. That's why it appears here, but I could now remove it and add capability. Sign in with Apple. This needs to be added to your app before you deploy it to a device as well. So let me quickly bring up the preview. Alright, here's the app on my device. I will hit sign in with Apple, and for the first time this should come up. Apple actually allows to either share your email or pass like a hidden email to the authentication provider, so that's a security setting. You might not get the real email of a user with this procedure. I'll hit continue, Face ID, sign in. And there I am. Welcome back, Simon. So what's happening under the hood is a lot of information. Let's see if we can make any sense of this. This is the data I think we get back from our Firebase provider. So there's really a lot of information. You don't need no real special information. Let's check it out. The important part is that you go to your database within Firebase, and you should hopefully see a new user in that collection with exactly the email, first name and last name written to the database. As well, in the authentication, you will see a new user using the Apple provider. And also, now I will show you one thing, because I'm pretty sure you will test this a few times. So if you click logout and sign in with Apple once again, the screen looks different. And if I go ahead with continue, perhaps we will also capture some logs. My remote debugging isn't working that great, so I have to rely on Xcode. Let's go back. The response now, as you can see, given name and family name is null from Apple. And if we would write this data to Firebase, you know, we would have a problem. So that's why we had this additional logic. Also, you still might want to try this again. So the whole procedure of creating a new user, for that you can go to the settings of your iPhone or whatever device, click on this top element, so your Apple ID, go to password and security, go to Apple ID logins, and from there you should see the application you used. You can simply swipe it to the side, delete it, stop using, and once you now go back to your application and press sign in with Apple again, the initial dialog for the sign in with Apple appears again. And that's it for today. Actually a rather long video, but I hope you learned a bit about the procedure of creating Apple sign-in and using it in combination as an OAuth provider with Firebase. If you want to see more on different other providers, just let me know below the video and I'm happy to create more content for you. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and stay subscribed so you get notified about all the new tutorials, quick wins, and other app development and web development videos on this channel. If you want to learn more about Ionic with in-depth courses, a community of like-minded developers so you can learn and build your apps faster, you should definitely check out the Ionic Academy, which is my code school to help you with everything Ionic, with a huge library of courses, material, and a supportive Slack channel so we can get your app out. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will see you inside the next video. Have a great day and happy coding, Simon.